A lot's happened since May 16th. Among other things, there was the third meeting of the Congress of People's Deputies, but obviously we also know that Putin blew up the Kakhovka Dam. There was Prigozhin's coup, obviously. Now there's threats of blowing up one of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine. I guess we really should start with these threats against the nuclear power plant. Do you want to talk about how credible that is, if you think that will happen, and if it does, what will happen next?
Well, I think it's more of a threat than a real danger, because, like, technically, I don't think it's very much feasible, and also in terms of consequences, they won't be good for Russia and for Putin. And just, you know, in terms of logic, right now the territory where the station is located is being controlled by Russian forces still, and that's a part of the land that they claim to be theirs. And making a nuclear meltdown there create a disaster. That means that those areas would be uninhabitable in the foreseeable future, like it happened in Chernobyl. So I more think that it was a warning that Moscow tried to send to the West. That's because right now, after they blew the dam, Ukrainian army can actually cross the remnants of Kakhovka reservoir, and they have not so much defenses there. So it's a threat if they attempt to do this, then the station could be blown up, and the consequences would be not just for Ukraine, but it would be for all of the Eastern Europe and maybe beyond that. So I think that it was rather a message to the Americans and Europeans, you know, that please prevent Ukrainians for doing something in that neighborhood.
So you have said many times in our interviews together, you know, the question comes up, you know, will Putin use nuclear weapons? And you're the one who always says he's not going to do it because he's not suicidal. He doesn't want to die. Does this fit in that same category? If he does it, would it be there'd be such a strong reaction from the West that it would essentially mean, you know, he's doomed, he's dead?
Yeah, that's what I think. That, and by the way, at the end of the day, the consequences of a nuclear meltdown at the power plant, they are worse than when just regular nuclear weapons are applied, because despite all the devastation that has been made by the nuclear attack, the radioactive consequences, they are way more constrained, limited, and short term. Just, you know, from a pure physics point of view. And with the power plant, they way more long living.
So where did this rumor or this threat originate? Did the Russians create this as a PR, you know, kind of a misinformation campaign? Is that the original origin of it?
Yeah, the origin was inside Rosatom, who is a Russian major, it's not operator, but an authority. It's officially, it's a state corporation, but it's the one who supervises the construction of the power plants, and it was chaired for many years by Sergei Kirienko, who is now the deputy chief of presidential staff, who is supervising all the political and PR affairs in the country. So I think that's where the whole thing originated. But I think that the people who requested this, they were military people. They understood the vulnerability on that direction.
Do you think that this threat is in some way a reaction to Prigozhin's coup?
No, I don't think it's related. I think it's more related to this Kakhovka Dam disaster.
So one thing leads to another, an escalation. So what do you want to say about Prigozhin's coup? There's been, ad nauseum conversation about it. Is there anything you want to add?
No, my opinion is very different from what is mainstream in the international media. I think that it was from the very beginning known by Putin that something like this would happen, and I think that was the reason why Prigozhin abandoned his plans, supposedly plans, so easily. Because I don't think that he was actually ready for a real coup, that he was not ready to change the power in Moscow. He could, like technically, military-wise, and I think that's the main positive thing in everything that has happened for us, because it's so to say a proof of concept. What we were saying all along, that the regime is vulnerable, and with relatively minor forces, with just several thousands of military personnel, one can actually go all the way up to Moscow and even get inside Moscow and present a real threat for the regime. Nobody believed us, but now it's obvious that we were right.
So I've learned a lot from you over the last year and a half, unfortunately. It's fortunate that I've learned things. It's unfortunate what I've learned. I find myself thinking more and more like I've learned from you, someone like Putin thinks. So it occurred to me, and some of this was based on things I read you saying early on about what Prigozhin did. It occurred to me that if Putin knew that if they were actually in cahoots and putting this plan together, then a couple of things would happen. One is, it was, as you've just suggested, it would signal to the rest of the world that actually all of the Russian forces are in Ukraine and the country's unable to defend itself. But on the other hand, if Putin knew what was going on all along and was actually a party to it or a partner to it, he would know that he didn't need to defend himself. And so it occurs to me this could have been a Trojan horse. It could have been all designed to set up to send a signal of weakness to the rest of the world about weakness on Russia's part, when in fact that's not the reality at all. And you could think you could stage a coup and take over Russia because there was no military there, when in fact the military is lying in wait. Do you think there's any credence to that?
No, I'm thinking along the different lines, because if this whole thing was like completely staged by all of the Russian machine, then it's pointless and it's actually counterproductive, because that would be an open invitation for an intrusion.
Yes.
That would be a manifestation of weakness. Why? No, I think that the whole point was that Putin knew, but he didn't plan this. The planning was on Prigozhin. He was just not that much concerned about his personal power in Moscow, because he was certain that Prigozhin would not attempt to replace Putin personally. And there are a lot of signs and indications that Putin was thinking along that lines, because otherwise he would give orders to remove certain forces from Ukrainian front and relocate them next to Moscow to defend Moscow. But he didn't. But that didn't happen. What was happening was the other way around. There were reinforcements that were sent to be dispatched alongside the Russian-Ukrainian border and in the front lines. That means that, like, military-wise, he was not that much afraid in reality that would happen. But at the same time, he needed this to look real, because otherwise the stress tests for the Russian elites would not work. He needed that Russian elites would believe in this genuinely. He needed Russian military to believe in this genuinely, and to test the loyalty and to see who is on which side.
So what happens with Prigozhin now? For instance, an hour or two ago, it was reported that he's no longer in Belarus. He's actually back in Russia. He's in St. Petersburg. Does this just become a forgotten chapter or pushed under the bed, or is he still relevant? And what happens next?
Well, I think that he is relevant because he is still the commander of one of the most capable military units in all of the Russian establishment. So he is relevant. But yeah, the fact that he was in St. Petersburg, it didn't happen now. It happened already several days ago. He was refunded all the money that were confiscated from him in St. Petersburg in his office, and we are talking about a sizable sum of money. It's close to 100 million US, what was confiscated and what was given back to him. The most peculiar thing which happened yesterday is that FSB invited him to their offices, and he went there to be given back his personal pistol that was presented to him as an award by nobody else but Shoigu, against whom was this coup happening.
Right.
So that was, I think, an open manifestation that was a pre-approved line of events. Otherwise, how that would happen? And Prigozhin is not afraid of being neither in Moscow nor in St. Petersburg. So that
Yes.
there is no manhunt. I heard certain people at CNN who was said, "Oh, he's a dead man now," and you know, they would try to assassinate him. So look, you know what's actually happening. Just people do not understand how the Russian politics actually working.
Well, I think that's an understatement. People do not understand how the Russian politics are working. I am one of them, which is why I'm so full of questions every time I talk to you. One of the things that was the most disturbing to me while Prigozhin was on the march, or presumably, is that suddenly there were many people in the West, I'm basing this on what I saw, for instance, in social media like Twitter, suddenly in support of him, thinking that somehow he was a hero who was going to throw Putin out or kill Putin. And yet, I don't think people understand you're just replacing one really rotten apple with another rotten apple, maybe an even more rotten apple. Do you want to say more about him as a person, as a leader, his reputation and his background?
No, look, if Putin is a mobster by spirit, then Prigozhin is literally a mobster. He is a convicted criminal. I don't quite remember. I think it was a rape or something like this. So like something really nasty. And that's why he has so much authority among prisoners, because he is one of them. And I think that's the beauty of Prigozhin for Mr. Putin, because he understands the rules, how Prigozhin behaves, and also that makes Prigozhin even uglier for all reasonable people. Nobody wants nuclear arms to fall in the domain of, in the possession of such a person. And it's not even the question of who controls the national big red button, but it's a question who actually controls the particular warheads, which then could be sold to somebody, I don't know, like Iranians, terrorist groups, like whatever. You know, nobody wants this, and that's exactly why it was so convenient for Putin to present the world that if it's not me, then it would be some criminals. And you better think twice whether you do support the regime change in Russia or not, because that's who is my alternative. But also, obviously, it's a false message, because the real alternative to Putin is Legion Freedom of Russia, and our structures. We are who will replace him seriously, and not just pretending to do this. Otherwise, Putin and Prigozhin, they are one. They are not two different entities. It's one entity. And
Yes.
Prigozhin is one of the most trusted people to Putin. He earned his trust when he was hosting this restaurant in St. Petersburg, and in this restaurant, the gatherings of all of the Putin's most intimate inner circle was happening for decades there. And it has to be the most trusted man, because he has to be a person who would not betray them neither to police or to security establishment, nor to the competitors. So it's a very, very, very close person who was tested in his loyalty for many, many years. And that's why it's the only person whom Putin entrusted with a sizable military force, with a lot of arms, giving it to a private mercenary, which was not happening in Russia before, and actually which is quite against of all Russian military and political traditions. So that all speaks in favor of my theory that it's a false context. But as the result right now, Putin looks as a victor, as a person who scored victory. He couldn't score victory in Ukraine, but he scored victory inside Russia. He unilaterally prevented the mutiny from becoming a success. And that's also very important that it was unilaterally when everybody vanished. And the only person who assisted him was Lukashenko, who is not Russian. So he's not a competitor in this regards. And in Russia, he has no competition. And the result is what we see already, is a surge in Putin's popularity. When everybody, smart is saying that, oh, he showed his weakness, for Russians, he showed his strength. Because he managed to defeat the enemies, and nobody understands what actually was happening there, but everybody see the bottom line, and the bottom line is that Putin once again prevailed.
It is interesting what you've just said, because he won in the eyes of Russians, but he lost in the eyes of the rest of the world.
Yeah, and he doesn't care about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
He cares about the rest of the world, that the world would be afraid. And I think in this light, he scored.
Yeah. Okay. So in June, about a month ago, there was the third meeting of the Congress of People's Deputies in Warsaw. It's unfortunate we have not been able to talk since then, but let's find out now, what happened there, what were some of the biggest accomplishments, and what's happening going forward.
I think that the major accomplishment that we completed work on the provisional constitution. Now we have this document, so now we have the document under which Russia would leave immediately after the change. And we started working on the municipal reform, which is also a critical part of legal infrastructure, so to say, because in our concept of the transitional period, all of the changes, they start from the bottom level, from the municipal level, from the communal level. And we need to create a legal framework so that people can understand what are the mechanisms of self-governing, and how these local mayors, local leaders, how they would be elected. That's very important.
So when you say, I can't quote you exactly how you referred to the state of the Constitution, but I want you to clarify that a little bit. Are you telling us that it is now completed as a written document and has been approved by the body of the Congress of People's Deputies?
Yeah, yes. Our concept, again, there is a certain transition period. During this transition period, obviously, the initial government is not being democratically elected. It is the government which is coming through a revolutionary process. So we need to leave from the moment when the changes happen up to the moment when democratic elections on the federal level are being held and the proper new parliament is elected and the proper new government is formed. And the ultimate new constitution is something that needs to be discussed with the regions, like it happened in the United States, so that the new country is being created again, bottom up, and not the other way around. And this full-scale new constitution is right now in the draft. And it doesn't make any sense to pass it. It's the initial draft. Congress listened to it, discussed it, but it would be up for the regions for a certain constitutional assembly, a certain process, to make it final. But
yes.
Before that happens, we need a transitional document, because it's already we need to stipulate all the basic human rights, what can and cannot be done. We just cannot live without any fundamental legal document at all. And so we took the existing constitution, we suspended the articles that are related to the relationship with the regions and with the federal authorities, with the government and with the parliament. That is being suspended, but everything that is related to human rights and all other basic procedures in the country, they needed to be revised, rewritten in the democratic fashion and not in Yeltsin and Putin fashion. Yes. And that's what was done by the Congress.
Now, one of the things you and I talked about in May or maybe in April was a meeting that you and other members of the Congress of People's Deputies had attended, I think in Berlin, bringing different Putin opposition groups together. It seemed like there was some really good forward momentum there of all the groups working together, including the Congress of People's Deputies, perhaps even some movement towards leadership for the Congress of People's Deputies from Michael Khodorkovsky. And I'm just wondering what's happened with the alignment of all those groups and what's happening with him and where is he focused today?
Well, right now, as always, there is a major split in the Russian opposition. This split is coming along the lines of whether the armed resistance is legit or not. Mm-hmm. Previously, the majority of the Russian opposition leaders were staying at the position, just non-violent methods, peaceful demonstrations and stuff like this. Right now, the majority is coming to stand on our position, that without military force, without actual fighting, no changes are actually feasible inside Russia. So it's moving in that direction, and some of the key leaders, like you mentioned, Khodorkovsky and Kasparov, they are also migrating in that direction as well. Now they're saying that, yes, we understand that this is something that needs to happen. The next step is in the recognition of the Congress. And here, obviously, it's a major power struggle. So from one side, they start to understand that it could be too late for them, because when Legion Freedom of Russia would actually liberate a part of Russian land, then obviously, a certain government there would be established, and, who is late, right? So it would be formed without them. So now we are in the process of negotiating, discussing, talking to each other, how the ultimate coalition would actually look like. Unfortunately, forces that are associated with Alexei Navalny are out of that picture. They don't want to take part in any negotiations, in any of reconciliation processes, but Khodorkovsky and Kasparov are in. And I think that at the end of the day, we'll reach an agreement.
Has the Navalny camp held itself separate from all the other opposition groups, or just the Congress of People's Deputies? I mean, did Khodorkovsky and Kaspersky or Kasparov relations, or has there never been relationships with Navalny?
Never. No, they were a long time in the past, but
Yes.
recent years, all of the Navalny group, they're standing on a totally separate position. And again, I do understand their rationale. Their leader is in prison. He, because of that, is not part of the transition process and would not be. So as already result of the regime change, we are to liberate him, but he would not be liberated before that.
Yes.
And in this situation, they don't want to restrict their maneuver and to tie their hands with any kind of coalition agreements. They want to start talking only after the change and not before that. I think it's too cynical. It's wrong. It doesn't help the change, but that's why they are standing on this position, and I do understand this point.
And in the West, so in Washington, in London, in Berlin, in Warsaw, for that matter, are leaders there beginning to give support to the work that you and the other opposition groups, and in particular the Congress of People's Deputies, are doing?
We see the movement. We are yet to come to the results, but the movement in this direction happens as we speak.
Yeah. Is it fear that holds them back, or uncertainty, fear of upcoming elections, or can you, is there a way of sort of lumping them all together in terms of where they're at today?
No, there are different kind of fears. Firstly, there is a personal fear for their personal lives. They feel, because they don't have any armed protection of themselves. And they fear if they would openly support something like this, then people with Novichok would come to them, they're really full of these fears. Secondly, they are afraid of making a wrong bet. Because one question is if Ukraine is victorious and dictates the conditions for the future settlement of the conflict, then obviously everything that we do is kind of the only way to proceed. Yes. But if what many people think, if it would come to a stalemate, and if the West would then force Ukraine to negotiate at some middle ground, and Putin's regime survives this defeat, then the situation may develop differently, and who knows in which particular direction. And thirdly, obviously, it's a question of just personal ambitions, and again, because it happens that my group is the leader of the process of the armed resistance, so they say, like, why you guys, why not us, how we share the authority, what is the relationship, where is our place in the future. So they need to come to terms to the idea that, yes, they need to negotiate with Ukraine. They need to negotiate and not dictate, but negotiate with those people who are making those military units and the resistance movement inside Russia. And the recognition of this idea for many people is a bit painful, but they would come to terms.
You mentioned the West. I don't know if you used the word force, but I think you implied it at least. The West forces Ukraine to accept some kind of compromise, some kind of negotiation. And I'm just wondering, as you're now a Ukrainian citizen yourself. You're in Kyiv. You're very involved politically there. I, from my perspective, cannot imagine in any way Ukraine accepting anything other than the return of its borders. And I'm just wondering, do you still see or have that sense that that's the will of the Ukrainian people?
Yeah, definitely. It's overwhelming majority. It's virtually a consensus within the society. That's why my take is it is highly unlikely that Ukrainians could be forced in a sort of a compromise. And right now, Ukrainians are pretty certain that they would prevail militarily, no matter what would happen in terms of the relationship with the West. But still, some people think that Russia is too strong, that Russia cannot be defeated at the end of the day, and that Ukrainians would change their position at some point in future. And the dominant position was expressed recently through just another leak from the circles that are associated with Mr. Burns and CIA in the United States. That okay, so let Ukrainians come next to Crimea, and then we start negotiating. That's what they see in their minds, because they can come in their heads that such an almighty Russia could actually be defeated and that Ukraine can liberate Crimea. They're just something which is incomprehensible for many. And you need to be inside the picture to realize the feasibility of such an outcome.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last thing. It may be an impossible question, but from time to time I've asked you about, what do you see as a timeline for this change in Russia? And at one point, you optimistically now, I realize, said April, May. It's now July. I so wish you had been right. But I just wonder, and do you have a gut sense of, I think we're approaching the end, or we're in for a long haul, or, what's your thinking today? It's July 6th.
I'm still very optimistic. And Prigozhin's raid reinforced me in my optimism. Mm-hmm. But I think that everything comes at a price. And this price, this toll can be very high. We need just to be conscious about lives of our own people.
Yes.
And that's why everything happens when it should happen. I don't think that we are talking about years. We are talking about months. But when in particular, obviously, I hope and pray for the end this year, but we'll see.
Yeah. Actually, one last question. When you wake up in the morning, every morning, do you think to yourself, maybe today's the day?
I am not that optimistic.
But there will be a day where it's the day.
I'm thinking differently. I'm thinking, what should I do today to make it the day?
Yes. Yeah. But one day it will be the day. And
one day it will be the day. It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that there will be an acceleration towards the end. And
yeah, sometimes I'm afraid of being late. Yes.
All right. Well, Ilya, it's great to see you again. It's great to talk with you again. I hope we can continue these on a weekly basis again for a bit until you get busy again. But thanks again for chatting with me today. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.